Hi, this is Dr. Anna S.2.E.46, and we are here today with the remarkable Jackie Linder, who is involved in some remarkable work. And she's really an expert in Canada on human trafficking and as well as childhood sexual abuse and the creation of a program to help children who have experienced immense childhood abuse, and she's working with a number of different programs. But today we're really going to focus on Jackie's conceptualization of childhood sexual abuse and the impact, the psycho-spiritual impact of childhood sexual abuse and her Be Brave program. So, Jackie, thank you for joining us today,
Thank you
and
for inviting me.
I'm so glad that we get some time to talk. Can you tell us a little bit about your conceptualization, your psycho-spiritual conceptualization of the impact of childhood sexual abuse?
Absolutely. That's actually a theory that I developed for my doctoral dissertation, and it was in response to my research as a trauma specialist, looking at the impact of childhood sexual abuse from a cognitive perspective, an emotional perspective, a somatic perspective. So there's some wonderful stuff going on in the literature, fantastic neurobiological research, very, very exciting findings that help us understand what's going on at the physical level of the brain and at other levels. But for me, there was a huge gap in the literature around the concept of psychospirituality. And this I became aware of this as a result of working with lots and lots of sexual abuse survivors in my private practice. I'm a trauma specialist and particularly specializing in complex post-traumatic stress disorder. When they would talk about things like they would feel like their soul had died, or they would feel like their soul had somehow been taken from them by the offender. And the current literature focuses on the biopsychosocial impact of childhood sexual abuse. But we know from studies around the world that people all over the world, not all people, but many, many people around the world have spiritual beliefs of all different kinds, right? We know this from spiritual practice. We know this from poetry, music, writings, and so on. So that piece about the idea of some kind of spiritual slash existential impact for sexual abuse is not actually really dealt with very well in the literature. So I was interested in that. I wanted to know more. And the word that resonated for me was soul. But the problem was that soul is actually a religious term. And so I wanted to build a psychological theory or a psychospiritual theory that did not have a religious foundation. And so I had to conceptualize, if soul isn't this magical spiritual thing from the theological side of the fence, how can it be applied on the psychological side of the fence? So I had to build a whole new model of soul, which I called the ecosystem of the soul, and I've published on it. And essentially what I described was the idea of soul as the meeting point or the seminal point of convergence of all aspects of self. So the self, that private, profound, deep, essential self that appears at 4 o'clock in the morning when you feel like you don't want to go on living, but you can't tell anybody that's the case, right? That private self. And the very simple image that I use when I'm working with my clients is this image of a bicycle wheel. So the outer ring of the wheel is the public face that we show the world. And everybody needs a public face. That's very important. The spokes of the wheel are the aspects of self associated with roles. So my role as a wife, my role as a daughter, my role as a teacher, a professor, so on, my role as a researcher. But that's not all of who I am. What I show the world and the roles that I take on in the world is not all of who I am. There is a private, profound self within me that is shared with me and the people who are closest to me. And that's the domain of injury that people described during my dissertation process. And it was very interesting because I had thought initially that sexual abuse was going to end up being like a dot where everybody who had experienced sexual abuse would, resonate with the concept of soul murder, because sexual abuse is one of the most heinous interpersonal traumas that we know of. And it's the highest level for dissociation, PTSD, and so on. So I imagined that just about everybody who had been sexually abused would agree with the idea that their soul had been murdered. But to my shock and horror and dismay, that was not the case at all. So when I actually did the research and I interviewed my participants, I had 12 participants in my study, and I used a very interesting qualitative method called intuitive inquiry. The very first person I interviewed said that term soul murder did not resonate at all. So, and I still had 11 people to go. And so I asked, well, if not soul murder, then what? Everybody agreed that their soul had been harmed in some way. Everybody agreed that there had been injury to that deep core self, but the magnitude of injury differed depending on the participants. So what came out of the study was a spectrum of soul loss that started with soul wounding, then soul withering, soul shattering, soul theft, soul flight, and soul murder. And that was 6 nodes on a spectrum of psychological injury after interviewing only 12 people. So then I got very interested because I took those findings and I presented a conference on family members of victims of homicide. And every one of them resonated with this idea that the murder of a loved one had destroyed them at an essential level. So then I start to speculate, if I had studied 20 people or 50 people or 100 people, what else is out there on the spectrum? I think there's quite a bit more, but this was the first study of its kind. And it helped me get to the deeper level, what I describe as the architecture of the self, the essence of the internal infrastructure of selfhood was finally touched upon in a way that CBT, in my experience, and a lot of the other conceptualizations just didn't get us there. I wanted to go deeper into the self system. So, taking that research, then we fast forward to the Be Brave Ranch, where I'm the clinical director of North America's only specialist child sexual abuse facility. We're in the middle of clinical trials right now, and we use a multimodal approach. So we use lots of evidence-based interventions like trauma-focused CBT. We use animal therapy. The kids have daily yoga. They have daily art classes. They have daily drumming, dance, or music. And all of that is actually about integrating the hemispheres, because we know that the hemispheric dysregulation is one of the neurophysiological outcomes of CSA. And lots of attachment work done with the kids, lots of nonverbal treatment interventions to get us deeper into the self system, lots of positive reinforcement using a token economy. So basically, we went into the literature when I led the developmental team, and we asked the question, show us everything that has ever been known to work for anybody who's ever been sexually abused. And then we pulled all of those things and we built a program. We engineered a program directly out of the data. And it's turning out to be an amazing, amazing experience. One of the best parts of the program is every 2 weeks we have a full therapeutic role play day. And on that day, the children, so we have a Mad Hatter's Tea Party every 14 days, and we have a Disowned Parts Party 14 days later. The Mad Hatter's Tea Party is a role play day that allows the children to try on a character that is the opposite of who they are in terms of their personality. So we have a little guy who, because he's been sexually abused, tends to be bullied in school or is quite sort of quiet and not a leader. We'll actually dress him up as an emperor and make him king for a day. And he actually has to role play being an emperor and try on that new behavior. And then with the Disowned Parts Party, we think about one aspect, one positive, resilient aspect of the child that we've seen glimmers of that we want to amplify. But what's super fun about it is all the kids dress up in full costume and all the clinical staff also dress up in full costume. And so 2 weeks ago, I went to work in a giant ball gown with a huge platinum white wig dressed as Queen Elizabeth I. So it's a wonderful, wonderful place to work.
Marvelous. Wow. This all sounds like you have pulled so many pieces together, Jackie,
Hmm.
and you're now manifesting a incredible opportunity for people to embrace their own growth and resiliency after trauma, both through your CSI conceptualization, as well as through Be Brave, which is a unique inpatient program. So I want to recap for our listeners today. And one, recognize that childhood sexual abuse can have tremendous impact. And you came up with a 6-level conceptualization that take a understanding of the impact from soul withering to soul murder,
Yes.
a recognition that there is too a kind of a dark night of the soul that people don't necessarily share. Instead, you use this bicycle wheel conceptualization where the wheel frame itself is the public face and the spokes of the wheels are the roles that you have in life, and then that inner, maybe the hub of that bike is your private, profound you in which the wounding can occur. So it's very deeply embedded. It's that 3 a.m. in the morning wake-up call when you're sitting with yourself and going, now I feel my wounded part. And
Hmm.
then 3, just this incredible Be Brave program which you are running, and the fact that you have outlets that are multimodal, whether they're yoga or CBT or an opportunity to role play something that is profoundly different than the role that you have today, as well as this idea that you can amplify the positive and let that come to light so that people can have an opportunity to really embody a new place in their life and give space and voice to that. So I am so impressed with the work that you're doing and so happy to share it with others, Jackie.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us today and your kind of in-depth knowledge of your field and everything that you're contributing to it today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
For more Ask Dr. Anna videos and information about post-traumatic growth and recovery, subscribe and like our YouTube videos at What is PTSD, or join us at previous video episodes in our playlist Ask Dr. Anna from the Traumatology Institute team.